think so. Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Does that work?
I think so. I think
Are we in business?
I think so. I think we're, let me make sure we got volume.
So I microphone,
I think so, and I think it's.
but do I need it for the virtual probably? Huh?
Yes.
Okay.
Just stand up. Yeah,
Is it on?
I believe so, yeah. I hear you.
Listeners on YouTube. It's not anything. Can you see it? I love good rains.
I'll go back to. You're just on the Zoom. Yeah.
Take a bow. Take a bow.
Are we ready to go? I think so. I think.
And the one that. Good evening. My name is
Steve,
the
president of the
North County Middle Council. Proudly brings you the program this evening. We have for you this evening what I think you'll find to be a very interesting and informative program on both the water quality in Door County and the testing of the water quality in Door County. You know, when you think about Door County, you think about all of the natural beauty that we have here. And if you had to choose just one attribute of Door County that makes it special, and you thought about it for a while, I think you would conclude that it would have to be the water. What if we didn't have all this beautiful, clean, fresh water here? And you're saying, well, what are you talking about? We're always going to have water here in Door County. We are. But what if it isn't always clean and it isn't always fresh? That could be a real problem. We have been blessed in Door County with pretty good water overall, very good surface water in the lake, and for the most part in the bay. But there is no guarantee that we're going to have that water quality coming forward. We have a number of threats to our water quality that Professor Kleinheinz and his team will talk about tonight. One of them certainly is E. coli, which is a bacteria. We saw increases last year at a number of the beaches in Door County with E. coli, which could just be an anomaly. We'll see, which makes the testing this year all the more important. We'll see if that's if there's a trend there, or if it's just a one-off, which it well could be. But we also have threats from phosphorus. And the thing that E. coli and phosphorus have in common is they both come from human or animal waste. And we have too much human and animal waste in the Bay of Green Bay, especially in the southern bay of Green Bay. Dr. Val Klump, professor had been at the UW Milwaukee, was the dean of the School of Freshwater Science, continues to study the Bay of Green Bay. He's telling us that the phosphorus levels are increasing in the bay. He's concerned about it. You've probably heard about this before, about the dead zones in the Bay of Green Bay, that they are seasonal, but they're expanding and lasting longer than they have before. But maybe more, and the dead zones aren't good, but maybe more crucial than the dead zones are the algae blooms that are coming off of these, the eutrophication process with all of the phosphorus. We're getting algae blooms that are large in the bay, and some of those algae blooms are blue-green algae, cyanobacteria. Blue-green algae, as you perhaps know, is toxic. If you get it on your skin, you'll get a rash. It affects people's breathing and respiratory functions. If you ingest it, you'll get Montezuma's revenge in a very real way. If your dog should swallow it, could be fatal. Very likely would be fatal. So it's very serious. If we would get blue-green algae floating on our beaches, it would be just a dramatic crisis for Door County. Now, I'm not doomsday. I'm not saying that's going to happen. What I'm saying is that we need to be vigilant about our water testing, and that's where UW Oshkosh comes in. We are very appreciative of the work that they've done for the last 18 years, and look forward to them continuing the testing. The Environmental Council actually is helping to fund some additional testing this year at additional beaches and more frequent testing at some of the beaches that they've been testing at before. You perhaps have heard about the lights that are going to be at 6 of the beaches this year. I was just at Sister Bay, and I didn't see the light. If it's there, I haven't seen it, but I think they will be installed soon. These will be very similar to, my understanding is they'll be very similar to stoplights, with green meaning everything is good, yellow meaning caution, and red meaning don't go in the water. I think people are going to pay a lot more attention to the water quality, because they're going to have more information than they've ever had before. I think that's a good segue into introducing our speaker this evening, which is Professor Greg Kleinheinz. He is the chair and distinguished professor of the Department of Engineering and Engineering Technology, and he's also the director of the Environmental Research and Innovation Center at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. For 18 years, Professor Kleinheinz and his group have partnered with Crossroads at Big Creek to have a state-certified microbiology lab in Door County. That's really important. He oversees over 50 students at over 100 beaches in 12 Wisconsin counties, who monitor the impacts of E. coli, pathogens, viruses, and emerging contaminants in recreational water. Professor Kleinheinz is no stranger to Door County, as he has a home in Bailey's Harbor. Let's give a warm Door County welcome to Professor Greg Kleinheinz.
Well, thank you, Mike. He just did about 5 of my slides for me. No, I'm just kidding. So, yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invitation from the Door County Environmental Council. This is a great facility. I was joking about the 1 barrel, but that is my office away from my office. So anyway, before I start, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm going to go through mostly surface water. I was going to touch on some groundwater things that the county's been doing, and I still can. But I want to be respectful of time, and technology is a wonderful thing. But I would love to, one correction to Mike's intro is, this is actually the 20th year we've been here. The lab's been at Crossroads for 18, but we were 2 years, we were at Sturgeon Bay Utilities. So this is actually our 20th anniversary in Door County. We were the first county until here later to fully implement beach monitoring, and that was the year after that outbreak at Nicolay Bay. And so it's really kind of, I don't know if we're gonna have a birthday cake or something in the summer or whatever, anniversary cake, but I couldn't do this on my own. So over those 20 some odd years, been something around 250 students. If you ever go to Starboard Brewery and Sturgeon Bay, have you been there? Yeah. So Amanda was one of the first students to come up here, and so met her husband, future husband. And so we always try to support Starboard Brewery. So anyway, having said that, okay, I don't want to talk about beer the whole time, but my last name is Kleinheinz, so that, like, you know, my German heritage sort of takes over. My wife, if it helps any, my wife's grandmother, when they emigrated, they came to Ephraim, but then she sort of went the wrong way and moved up to the UP. But anyway, so with that being said, we have 6 students that are working for us this summer. You know, our summer research staff, they're fully embedded. One's a local, the other 5 live in a house in Bailey's Harbor. And And so with that, I'll just ask them quickly to maybe stand up and just introduce themselves. One's not here because her cell phone blew up and she's giving technical support, but anyway. Let's start.
Noah, studying environmental studies, policy and values, at UWO, and I'll be working on the trash roll this summer.
Marine debris vessel.
I am an environmental engineering student at Michigan Tech.
I'm Evan Ricky. I'm a fisheries and product sciences major at UWC Point. And I'll be working with Noah trash boat, but we'll also get some samples.
I'm Abby Barons. I'm gonna be a junior and I'm studying environmental science studies at UWO. I originally started at Minnesota State University, Mankato for 2 years, and I'm just transferring to UWO. I'm Sarah, everybody. I'm actually a grad student, so it's public health and public policy, and I'm just a voter and doing on my page.
So today thanks guys. So today I'm going to talk about the history of, whoops, this is kind of hard to use, but the history of the beach program here in Door County. What are some of the sources of contamination? And at any point, please, I don't want to make this a one-way dissemination of information. So if you have questions, raise your hand. I'd rather make this interesting to everybody that's here, whether it's virtually, and I'm not sure how we're handling questions, but if you're on the Zoom, feel free to just cough or interrupt and we'll try to get your questions. I will then talk a little bit about maybe well monitoring, but again, for the sake of time, maybe we'll just start into some of the emerging issues that relate more to the surface water. And I'm happy to talk to anybody else. If you've been participating in the well program that Door County Soil and Water has been doing for the last couple of years, you would have heard of the things that I would talk about in that. So and then, what do we need moving forward? And I think, you'll hear some common themes, whether it was from Mike or myself. As a scientist, more is always better, right? And so, you don't know what we don't know. I have 2 college daughters, and I always tell them that too, that, oh yeah, I'm going to do this, or if I do that, this is what's going to happen. I'm like, you don't know. Yeah, I know. I'm 20. I know. Okay. I hope I didn't sound like that, but anyway, I probably did. So the funding for the beach monitoring in Wisconsin and in all coastal states comes from the Beaches Environmental Assessment and Coastal Health Act. That was authorized in 2001. Wisconsin was the first state to implement that. Door County, the first county in Wisconsin, fully implement that again. And Rhonda, who was the health officer before Sue, we've got all sorts of famous people here, was the person that I connected with and was really passionate. You'll also hear a theme as we go through this about Door County being very proactive. A number of the departments and county personnel, some counties at the time when this funding took place or was released, they said, oh yeah, we don't want to know, right? If I don't know, then I don't have a problem. And that, in Manitowoc County, for a while, 40% of their beach samples, their beach was closing. Can you imagine if Egg Harbor was closed 40% of the time, or Sister Bay, or pick a beach in Door County? So anyway, this funding is for coastal beaches, which includes the Great Lakes. And it was authorized for monitoring of fecal contamination. And we'll talk a little bit more about that because I think there are some misunderstandings about E. coli and so forth. And we talked about, I heard blue-green algae and then cyanobacteria before. I always joke, so my PhD is actually in environmental microbiology. And so when people call out bacteria blue-green algae, they get really upset. And it's, but in all seriousness, if somebody told me 25 years ago, I did my PhD doing industrial air treatment design for industry. And so if somebody told me I'd spent a 25-year career at the beaches in Door County and other places, I would have said, you're kidding, right? But it's been great. I mean, I was at Egg Harbor today, and I was over at Bailey's Harbor. I mean, what a great place to spend your professional time. Most of the people affected are small children, elderly, and immunocompromised. And what are some of the sources, right? We invented little swimmers, Kimberly Clark in the Fox Valley in Wisconsin. So, human beings, obviously cattle, other sorts of animal husbandry operations, pets, waterfowl, deer. This is Whitefish Dunes a number of years ago. Obviously, it's much larger than it used to be. And one of my favorite pictures, this is an outhouse. This is in the UP. No, I'm just kidding. I was on a call the other day and I had Washington Island in back, Schoolhouse Beach in the background, and the guy was like, "Oh, that looks just like the Caribbean." I'm like, "Yeah, but it's June. Wait until January. They look quite different." But anyway, so they come from all sorts of sources. So this is just a box culvert that's just draining stormwater from a town. This is an industrial discharge. This is actually just off of the beach. It's called Warm Waters, right? So it just goes to a power plant. Just regular tributaries. You notice a lot of sediment and other things in that one. Our white little friends that are everywhere, right? And then of course the sort of ubiquitous poop factory that is the Canada Goose, all over the place. Although I will use this as an example a little bit later. You don't see this at a lot of the Door County beaches anymore. If you looked about 15 years ago, you'd see them all over the place, including right down the street. I'm going to use Egg Harbor as an example in a good way. Overland flow, so things washing off grassy areas, no real sort of control of stormwater, inefficient infrastructure. Anybody know what this is? What? The pizza. It's a pig. And the feminine hygiene product. How about this? I'm standing there like, Mr. PhD piled higher and deeper with some students. We're looking at this large fecal material, like, what could that be? And all of a sudden you hear behind us, here comes a horse, right? So that's horse feces. How about this? So you look along the beach. Well, it's hard with this pointer, but you look along the beach here and you can see all of this. It doesn't look like much, but when you zoom in, it's some sort of biblical plague of insects that have just sort of died and all washed up on there. So you never really know what the sources of those are, or the source of any sort of fecal contamination is going to be. But feces contains millions of organisms, 1 times 10 to the 23rd microorganisms per gram. So it's literally a pile of stuff, right? And so some of that's harmless. Some of them are pathogens. Some are what we call opportunistic pathogens. That is, they don't really cause disease in most cases, but given the right opportunity or the right individual, they can. So oftentimes we can't look for pathogens. So things like salmonella, norovirus, things that I'll show you in a minute, we can test for those. There are methods to do that, but they take days and they're expensive. And, so I could test, go sample Egg Harbor today, and I could tell you next Monday or Wednesday how the water was today. So because of those limitations, we look for harmless organisms or things that indicate the presence of those other ones. And those are what we call fecal indicator organisms, and we'll come back to that. But these are commensal organisms, so that means they're found in the guts of warm-blooded animals. That's their primary host. They get jettisoned into the sort of environment. And so once they get out in the environment, they have a number of sort of battles for survival, if you will. They can reinfect another host, right? So another mammal or another animal of some sort. They have low nutrients. They have sunlight, desiccation, variable temperature, pH, and moisture in the sand, predation from other microbes, and all of those lead to death and destruction of those microbes. So the moral of the story is when you put microbes into the environment in this kind of environment where we have seasonality, those microbes don't last and really build up over long periods of time. So that's good news, right? So we jettison them in the environment and they have a finite lifespan as long as we don't keep putting more of them. Oh, I forgot my skull crossbones. So we test for bacteria because they're easiest, and we use E. coli. So Escherichia coli, we'll come back to that. Everyone hears about E. coli. And every Great Lakes state has adopted officially E. coli as the indicator organism for regulatory purposes. Everybody says, oh, E. coli is pathogenic. Well, in fact, it's not. Most E. coli are not pathogenic. 0157H7, which is the species or serotype that you see in raw hamburger, causing foodborne outbreak of disease. That one is pathogenic, and you can count about on a couple hands the number of pathogenic strains. That organism would not show up in the beach test that we use. So, and the beach test most people use. So the fact of the matter is most E. coli is not pathogenic, but it gets a bad rap. But it is a good indicator for the presence of fecal matter. And you can debate whether it's good or bad. So some, people will say it's not the best indicator. And then you say, okay, that's great. Give me a better one that's reasonably priced and people can use. And then that ends the conversation, right? But we're really concerned with things like salmonella, Campylobacter, avian botulism, one that people don't think about. But when the cladophora mats that were here in the sort of late, 2008, 7s, that was a big issue. And so Vibrio vulnificus and shorelines, norovirus, thing that turns cruise ships around, cryptosporidium. I mean, Wisconsin's home to the biggest outbreak of waterborne disease in the world or in the US history. And we'll talk about cyanobacteria again in a little bit. But at the end of the day, all of that gives us an indication of some risk, right? So the level of those organisms don't tell us we're going to get sick or we're not going to get sick. It gives us a relative level of risk. So when I drive my car home tonight, the faster I drive, the higher the risk will be that I won't get there, or the higher the risk I'll get a ticket. And so the same with the bacteria. It's a statistical probability that there's going to be some outcome, and that is highly credible gastroenteritis. Based on EPA studies, we use E. coli for freshwater. If you go to marine systems, you're in Florida on either coast, they actually use a different fecal indicator. I keep wanting to use this pointer. It doesn't work. It works, but it doesn't work on the board. It's like sucks it up. Anyway, they use nitric oxide. Same thing, but based on epidemiological studies that were done in the 1970s by EPA, that's the reason that those were separated like that. In Wisconsin, for our regulatory purposes, beach samples are collected at 24 inches. It sounds ridiculous, but every single state has different standards. Michigan collects at a different depth, Minnesota at a different one, and so forth. And it's 12 inches under the water. It's a 100 ml sample. So if you've ever done drinking water, same thing. Water is always sampled in a 100 ml container. It's not expressed in mils or grams or whatever. It's always so many organisms per 100 mils. They're immediately placed on ice, returned to the lab. In our case, as was mentioned, our labs at Crossroads at Big Creek, they've been a gracious partner for many years with us, and it allows us to get anywhere from the county back there in a couple hours to get them analyzed. We've done all three of these methods. So membrane filtration is the traditional method. It's been around for 50, 60 years of the original EPA method. The defined substrate test has been around since the early 2000s. That's probably the test that 98% of the labs use. We also had the lab here set up to do qPCR. We do have the equipment to do that, and ran qPCR, which is quantitative polymerase chain reaction. It's looking for DNA in the environment. It's a much faster method. It's a little bit more expensive. It turns out it didn't work really well in Door County. And the reason it didn't work very well is a good reason, is that the overall fecal levels were pretty low here. And the original studies that showed that it worked were done in places like Chicago and Gary, Indiana, and Cleveland, and there was a lot of human input. In Door County, we don't see a lot of human input of fecal material, so it just really didn't seem very efficient for what we needed here. We could always go back to it and revisit it, but we did a comparative study with EPA around the Great Lakes, and that it didn't seem to be very reliable. Again, we just add sample to the trays. We add to this quantity tray. It gets sealed up. That picture on the lower left shows the fluorescence. This shows kind of the equipment again. And then it's like, I always call it like battleship. We have this most probable number table, all based on statistics, and somebody who really likes numbers and probably lives in their parents' basement came up with this. And so, you count up the number of those large ones and small ones, and you get some number. And this has all been validated based, versus all the other methods. And so every day, our crew is out, is out collecting samples, bringing back to the lab. They are determining the number first thing in the morning. And then that number then guides us whether that beach is open or closed for that day, and then what the next steps are. If it's open, then the data gets entered and we move forward, and so forth. In Wisconsin, we're also, we can't be normal. So we're the only state in the United States that has a two-tiered monitoring or notification system. As part of the Beach Act, you have to publicly notify the public of the results of those tests. And so advisory is 235 if there's 235 E. coli or more, or to 299, that's considered a beach advisory. If you're at 1,000 or more, that's a closure. Every other state, most states use 235, Michigan uses 300. 235 was the original number in the 70s EPA came up with, and that's where that came from. And I would love to tell you that 1,000 really means something here. It doesn't. Like, I was part of the work group and they said, well, 1,000 looks pretty good. Like, can't you make it like a 999 or 998? So it like seems like we're putting some thought into this. But it's about 13 people per 1,000 users come down with highly credible gastroenteritis.
Could you say a little bit more talking about the numbers? When we looked at the beach reports, the number, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was 2419.6 came up several times, which I believe is the limitation of the lab method used.
Correct. So yeah, so you'll see bigger numbers. So you're right. So when you put the question is, for those of you on the well, I was gonna say phone, that shows all over. When I say like I'm at home, I'm gonna record something, or anyway, when you look at this coal alert quantity tray right here, if you just take your 100 ml sample and put it in there, the most that will quantitate is 2,419 point some number. So that's normally at the beaches, we don't see any number higher than that. There is some data that I'll show you a little bit later. If we expect high numbers like stormwater or other things, we can actually do a dilution of this, so like 10-fold or 100-fold. So you'll see some numbers like 325,000. But normally we wouldn't do that. The reason is if you dilute it out too much, then it also changes the limit of detection on the bottom end. So instead of having 1, if you dilute it 10-fold, the lowest number is 10. If you dilute it 100, the lowest number is 100. So you can't have 1 and the 24,000 or 240,000. So yeah, so if you see 2419, that means that the test, all of those wells turned positive, and that was the most that they could quantify at the time. Yeah, that's a good question. So this is the data from, as Mike mentioned, there was some concern, I think, last year because of some of the numbers. So this is data that the health department put together over the last 6 years. So if you look at, and I just highlighted a couple things, and I know it's hard to see this, and I'll share these slides with you all. But there's a couple things to notice. First of all, back in 2017, which was after the beach redesigns, there were 53 advisories and 14 closures. So that was a pretty high number. And if you look at around the next 4 years, the numbers, range from 26 advisories, 34, 30. So they're not too different. The closures are 10, 9, 13, 12. So not too different. Last year, we were back to 55 advisories, which was very close to 2017. The big difference was the number of closures. But if you really look a little bit closer, half of the entire county's closures were Ottumba for some reason. You'll see Ottumba in a minute. But also, if you look at the number of closures, Fish Creek, since they did their redesign a few years ago, their number of advisories is a pretty significant, by far the most of the county. And so that's a pretty big number, 50 over that period of time. So anyway, so as Mike said, this is this one bit of data, 50, in 2022, was it raining so many times, on the particular sample day, wind speed, wind direction, there's all sorts of things that influence that. But it isn't completely off the chart, right? So if we just look back 5 years earlier, we have roughly the same number. So, but that's why we collect the data, whether it's groundwater or surface data. We want to make sure that this is, sort of something that's a, abnormality in the data. And so we'll find out after 2023. And you guys, I hope it's an abnormality. If it's not, you guys can have me back next year and say, I told you so. I'm going to throw things at me. But this is the public notification that goes on. So as the group goes out to the beaches in the morning, one of the group goes back to the lab at Crossroads. They look at the samples. They're ready to go at 8 a.m. Somebody looks at the sample, just 1 second. They look at the sample at 8 a.m. and then they're able to make a notification. So they actually log the samples right into the DNR database. So it's real time for anybody that wants to use it. They then call whoever the sampler is if there's an advisory or closure near a beach. And they'll say, oh, you know, pick a beach ABC, needs to get resampled because it's close. So whoever the closest sampler is will go to that beach, literally put in a sign, like, you know, in the upper right, you know, those advisory closure signs, grab another sample and bring it back. There's always some delay in that. Somebody might be in Sister Bay and they have to run to Murphy. And so, you know, there's some delay and there's always somebody on their computer exactly to catch that delay. So to help with that, as was mentioned, the signs in the lower right, those are at the county garage right now. Those are actually stop signs that will go in at, there's 6 of them the county invested in this year as a demo. And those will go in at those beaches, and that way the person in the lab gets the data, they can go right on their phone and change it. And conversely, the next morning, if it's open, boom, they don't have to wait for somebody to drive over to the beach and open the beach. They can just change it right on their phone. So if somebody swings by there, then they have the most up-to-date information.
You mentioned redesign of the beaches. You mentioned redesign of the beaches, and I know some of it was done for aesthetic and visitor reasons, but was some of it done for water quality reasons?
Yeah, in fact, we worked on, I'm gonna go through the Egg Harbor example. Most all of it should have been done, and we worked very closely with the Soil and Water Department, should have been done for water quality reasons. It turns out, as a side of that, we got increased aesthetics, and I'm gonna use Egg Harbor as an example. That was something that I think nobody really anticipated at the beginning, but there was 5 or 6 years of what we call E. coli source identification work that was done in each of those to identify what the source of the E. coli was. Now, some locations decided they fully adopt those plans, all proposed by the engineer in our group. Some of them decided they wanted to do things that were unique to their own communities. Some wanted to do just whatever they wanted. So every community decided to adopt it a little bit differently. But in most cases in Door County, they were done with the intention of improving water quality. And I'll use Egg Harbor as an example in a minute. And I can go through a number of those. So, you know, as the source identification, you know, once we know we have these E. coli that are existing and present, you know, what do we do with it? We adopt this stepwise approach where we actually looked at historical data. We did site assessments. We helped develop EPA sanitary survey tool. Again, Door County was in the forefront when EPA was developing this. They came to us and said, will you pilot it in Door County? Absolutely. So all the sanitary surveys that are used nationwide were piloted here in Door County. Beach redesigns based on all that information was then presented to communities. Soil and Water here went out and got grant money to help fund those. In our case, we helped 60 communities around Wisconsin do the same thing. We had the mitigation efforts, and then what we consider a blue investment. And I'll go through a little bit of the economics of that in a minute. You know, so what's in there? All the meteorological conditions. FIB isn't an Illinois person, that's a fecal indicator bacteria. Sorry. I've had people ask, that's not very nice. I'm like, no, that means fecal indicator bacteria. I'm like, oh, okay, sorry. Anyway, water temperature, water color, turbidity, things like goose and gulls. I'll give you an example of all the stuff we did. We had 2 summers where 2 students, all they did is go around and count avian feces on the beach. They literally would throw these hula hoop type fields. They would count the avian, you know, species. They got experts like what's goose, gull, you know, cormorant, whatever. That's what they spent the whole summer looking at a correlation between fecal droppings on the beach and then it washing into the water. At the end of the day, they spent 2 years, no correlation. But they got a good tan. So anyway, looks at pipes and drains, wetlands. You know, the sanitarian's office was going through septic records. And so identifying, we were in one community where there was just old infrastructure that, you know, things were just going into the stormwater. And the good news after all of this was done, you know, we wanted to sort of characterize where the beaches were in terms of the pollution. The good news and bad news was the fecal pollution in Door County and pretty much every other beach in Wisconsin comes from Door County. Right? The bad news is it comes from Door County, so you have to figure out what to do at your local beach. But the problem is local. It's not when the first problem started here, they were blaming Milwaukee, they were blaming Menominee, Michigan, all of these things. It's too much water and too great a distance. So the good news is you have control over what you do. And then from that point on, people went and said, listen, again, to Door County's credit, we want to be proactive. So the administrative people and the different government groups here said, we want to be proactive and take this head on. So, looking at like Sister Bay there, all the infrastructure, you've got outfalls, here's Whitefish Dunes, pretty much rural, looked at sampling in different areas, looked at watersheds, where does all of the water that comes to Bailey's Harbor, where does it end up? Those are all the little green dots. So you can see that whole watershed kind of drains right to the beach. Here's Otumba, 2 storm drains. Why are there storm drains always at the beach? I wish that was reasonable. Why do you think? What?
Lowest point.
Well, it's low, yeah. But I bet there's some people's property that's just as low. It's public property, right? So when they put all that stormwater infrastructure in, they have to daylight it somewhere, and that's public. And so, so at Otumba, you've got 2, it's kind of like, the perfect storm. You've got 2 outfalls. We had rain gauges set up all over the county. There's 5 of them. And when they would reach 0.25 inches of rain in a 24-hour period, you guys are lucky you're not doing this. It would call the students up and it would say, cock-a-doodle-doo, go sample. And they would have to go to the beaches in the pouring rain right away, 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours. And so they were out sampling to get the effect of the rain on the beaches. And one of my favorite stories is my brother-in-law was buried at Latham, or his reception was at Latham Smith, and it was pouring on a Friday night. And I never heard from the students that they were sampling. And so like about 10 o'clock, 10:30, I called them up and said, hey, have you guys want sampling? No, it's not really raining in Door County right now. I'm like, what? I'm in Energy Bay, it's been pouring for 2 hours. And it's like silence. Yeah, wow, we're just leaving. It would. It was Saturday night, it didn't matter when, it would call. But look at some of these numbers, so we did spatial sampling out of the left outlet, 82,000 E. coli per 100 mils. What's beach advisory? 235. Look at that number, 325,000. So that's where we get to the dilution part of it. And actually in the subdivision or that sort of neighborhood, we were pulling storm drains and looking at each individual catch basin. It was really, this was pre-COVID and pre sort of 9/11, I guess. But like we were in this white van and we would just pull up to this, manhole and just like pull the storm drain up. People would jump out, pull the storm drain up, grab a sample and put it back down. It must have looked really odd. But anyway, this just goes to show sort of some of the, an example of some of the data that was collected to get to the beach redesigns in the county. Looked at E. coli in the sand. I mentioned that project. We did things like land use. We did DNA. I'll show you that in a second. We looked at Cladophora for a while because Cladophora was sort of like accumulating and everybody was like, oh, it stinks. And I'll give you a good example about how that influences E. coli. So we looked at a big Cladophora mat like this, left to right. And the Cladophora mat would be the 1 through 10 you see in the middle, kind of the green. And so the E. coli numbers were up as high as 160,000 E. coli in that mat. Because if you remember back to my original slide about the things that cause predation and degradation of E. coli in the environment, low nutrients, UV sunlight, lack of moisture, all of that, right? Once they're in that mat, it's like feces away from home, right? So they were thriving, and then the numbers to the left and right of that were the water outside of the mat. So what would happen is you'd have a Cladophora mat impounded on a beach. It would sit there and cause this sort of microbial soup. Wind would change. It would wash away. 10 minutes later, a family comes down and they want to go swimming, right? And so they're swimming in a bunch of microbial carnage. We did genetic evaluations. You can't see this, but like this is sort of like 23andMe. All of this on the left side, every dot you see is a different E. coli sample. This is the sort of genetic profile of each of those. This is their family tree. And if you zoom in even more, well, you can't see because this is in the way, but you see 2 really highly related E. coli. One was from the wastewater treatment plant and one was from the beach, right? So you were able to, this was not Door County, but this shows exactly what you can do with some of these evaluations. So really, the county went all in with the source identification, really trying to find that. And that led to these beach improvements. And since we're in Egg Harbor, I just picked Egg Harbor. It's a great example. This is the original beach. I don't know how long everybody's been in the county. This was done in 2009, I think. Somebody could probably correct me if I'm wrong. So this is the original beach. This is sort of the beach redesign, and what was found at this particular beach, there are no stormwater drains at the beach, but all of the water, as you know, comes down that hill, right? So everything washing from the roads, you know, houses, you know, even some of the sort of you know, grassy areas up there just ran right down the hill, and it was kind of like a runway right to the beach. And so you can kind of tell by the contour lines there. There was an infiltration or bioswale that was put in, some confinement, and keep an eye on that yellow kind of U-shaped structure. That's the original Egg Harbor Beach, which you'll see in some pictures in a minute. This is just a picture of that plan up close. There's the original beach again, showing, again, you don't need to know a lot of this, but you know, you can see some cord walks here. You'll see dune grass planted, nourishment. This jetty gets removed. Here's our parking lot area. And the whole point of this was, I wish I could tell people we're doing cold fusion or something else, but we're really just using tried and true principles that are standard in the use of septic systems, right? So we're looking at infiltration and trying to get things to come down the slope here, come down the hill, and then infiltrate vertically where you get treatment and separation, and then clean water just under the surface, just exactly the same way your drain field works in a septic system. This was the original beach. Again, look at all the geese that were out there all the time, pretty low. I mean, there's grass growing up on your beach. That's never something you want to see. This is it. Remember this number. It was between 13 and 15 people per day per hour at that beach. For all the years we monitored it, 7 or 8 years before the redesign, that's how many people are there, right? So this is what it looked like. All grass filled with goose poop, this rock jetty, which is a physical hazard for people swimming there, and this tiny little beach, right? So all this infrastructure that was decaying from years ago was all removed. These are the infiltration basins that were put in there. You can kind of see where they are today. And again, that's our little biofilter infiltration bed. The original beach on your left, the current one on the right, to give you a little bit through the construction. So again, left and right. On the right-hand side, nice picnic area. That's really neat. You know, family has a picnic. Well, that's not the whole purpose of that. All of the plantings around there, geese will not go anywhere they don't have line of sight. If you want to see the best example of this, it's in Nelson Bay. That town park, they used to all swim up from the shore, not next to the beach on the other side of that sort of break wall. And there's a planting there. All of those plantings deter geese, so they won't land there. And that's the reason they were put there. It wasn't just because people like plants. There were reasons why things were all done originally. Dune grass was planted, some riprap to slow down the, this is a good one. So the re-engineering plan called for the riprap to be put in there like that. The contractor decided they knew better, and then didn't put it in the first year, and it just washed right out. So the riprap was put back in, dune grass was planted. This is what it looks like. So everything comes down, hits that riprap and goes left or right, then infiltrates vertically, so none of it goes over onto the beach. Whoops. This is what, that's kind of a bad picture, but this shows that picnic area. And this is what it looked like when it was done. So nice dune grass in there, forest pavement on the right, you can see there, infiltration. You've got a nice cord walk. The cord walks are there again to train individuals, people, so they don't trample the dune grass. Also, geese won't go down. It's sort of like a survival instinct, right? Normally they're curved a little bit, but you can see the nice dune grass. Unfortunately, it does not look like that today because the dune grass has been sort of overtaken. It requires somebody to adopt it and help weed it and get those sort of invasives out of there. So largely the dune grass has now been pushed out of there. There's a lot of weeds and things in there. So it could get rehabilitated. But this is what the beach looked like when it was done. So aesthetically, much nicer beach, right, than it was to begin with. But the real purpose of this was to treat the water that's coming down into the beach. So you're accomplishing both things. And this is what the beach looks like on most days. I went down there this afternoon at 3 o'clock, 62 people at the beach, right? And that was nothing. I mean, I don't know how many people are here. We've had them count 300-400 people at a time now. I mean, that's like too many for me. But Anyway, but that's not uncommon for those of you that have been down there. I mean, the village thought it was so important, they bought the lot next door, right? And so now the beach is twice as big and they got all that extra space. And so what does that mean? So we decided, like, okay, I'm not a rocket scientist, right? I'm like, wow, I'm just kidding. But this has to have some impact on the town, right? So through NOAA and some partnerships, I partnered up with an economics professor. We developed some econ surveys where we wanted to ask two questions. What are people willing to pay for better beaches and better water quality? And then what do they pay, what do they put into the local community? And we did 2 years worth of sampling, then COVID hit, then we even came out during COVID and handed people little postcards they could scan with their phone. I don't know if anybody ever did that. Looking at, high water quality to low, we gave them a whole bunch of parameters. We gave them, examples A and B, would you do this? Would you do that? And the moral of the story was people said that they would pay $89 a year to improve the water quality to yellow, and they'd be willing to pay $337 a year to improve it to the highest levels. So what this said was people are willing to invest, like individually, not as necessarily as taxpayers. And so they're willing to pay something. And then the number of beach visits per year was about 4. So we said, how many beaches do you visit a year? And they said about 4. So a lot of these are, tourists and so forth. Then what did they spend when they came? So this is kind of broke it down, but basically at the end of the day, $42. So every person that came to, I'm picking on Egg Harbor, the Egg Harbor Beach, spent $42 in town that day. So if you average 13 people a day or 15 people a day before the re-engineering, and then now you've got, just pick a number, 300 people a day or 300 people per hour, not necessarily, the same 300 people. Now you've got $42. If you look at this region wide, if you had 500,000 beach visits, which seems like a lot, but it's not, I'll show you some numbers in a minute. You're talking about huge numbers here, right? So you've got 250 people employed, you've got indirect employment, induced employment, total numbers, $38 million and $3 million of local tax revenue just from the investment people using the beaches. And so I think that when you look at this, you get this, I figured this out. Some other people in Chicago have figured out around $60 a person. But if you said 150 beach visitors times 30 beaches, which is the number of beaches monitored in Door County every day in the summer, 90 beach days, $50 each, that's $20 million that beach users are putting in. And people do make decisions about what beach they go to. Egg Harbor was the first beach in the county to do the re-engineering. Families will look and they'll go, oh, hey, I'm going to go to Bailey's Harbor because Egg Harbor's closed, or I'm going to go to Fish Creek. And so, right, you're 15, 20 minutes from all these different locations, and people will make decisions based on this is what my family wants to do. So that was an eye opener for people. That's when all the other villages started going, hey, whoa, we want to do ours, we want to do ours. And so other people started doing that because I think they realized it looked better. And so, I think what the moral of the story is at the end of the day, beach monitoring is, and the other issue I'll say, it's a little bit unrelated. So I grew up in the state. If you live in Wisconsin and you have property on the lake, family property, it is very difficult for many people to retain that for generations, the way the tax structure is. In Michigan, it's completely different. Michigan has more miles of shoreline than any other state in the lower 48. Your taxes don't get reassessed until the point of sale. So once you get it, it doesn't change much until it's sold. I know I have a place and neighbor builds this $2 million shack. Every 10 years I get reassessed. We've heard from a number of people that have said to us, thanks for everything you do at the beach, because my family's owned this property or that property and we had to sell it because we couldn't afford it because everybody built their houses, kind of next door, and we just got kind of priced out of the neighborhood. So I think beaches offer kind of a threefold benefit. There's water quality improvements that all this redesign did. There's an economic benefit for sure, not only countywide, but for the communities that are investing in that. And the third part is sort of like an environmental sort of justice or equality type of thing, where anybody can go to the public beach. So you're not paying to go to the Kalahari, and those that can't use that or can't own that resource now have a really nice place to go, where sometimes before they were neglected. It was just sort of an afterthought, right? Well, here's some sand at the end of the road and go enjoy yourself. So I think this is a unique combination of ways where people can do the environmentally and economically right thing, if you will, at the same time. So anyway,
I'll skip over the well work. This is really hard for me, like skipping over all this good data. But anyway, but then every couple of years we get on to the newest thing. Anybody know how much trash gets put into the Great Lakes? Like plastic debris a year. 3 beer at the 1 barrel if you did it right. I work with the state. I'm not supposed to advocate or that. You can pick any brewer you want. Anybody want to give me a number?
20 million tons.
22 million tons of plastic in the Great Lakes every year. Does anybody else find that amazing? I was pretty shocked a few years ago when people came to me and they said, "Hey, are you interested in doing some marine debris?" I said, "What? Pick up trash?" They're like, "It's marine debris." I'm like, "Okay, marine debris." But this is literally, we went down to the Brewer Stadium and the Brewer players from the Caribbean that they would bring others down there, and they said this is what their beaches would look like, and they would do cleanups. And I was in Chicago on Earth Day using some of the equipment you'll see in a minute as a demo. And I mean, the stuff you find in some of those beaches is just like horrific. I couldn't even imagine, you know, hypodermic needles, glass, this, that, I mean, stuff that washes in from hundreds of miles away, right? So I said, yeah, absolutely. I want to be involved in the marine debris world, right? So this is obviously extreme. This is actually Great Lakes pictures. So cigarette butts, there's some weird doll head. I don't know why it's there. We find condoms, all sorts of stuff. It makes you really wonder what happens at night on the beaches sometimes. Plastic straws, but all this kind of weird stuff. So we got an EPA grant and a NOAA project to start looking at marine debris. It's based in Sturgeon Bay, so we house our marine debris vessel. These guys are running it this summer at Crossroads, and we do Sturgeon Bay. They also go 1 day a week. They go down to Kewanee and Algoma. They go down Manitowoc, and then they go over to the mouth of the Fox River. And so the goal of that is to take this boat, which is in the upper right. That's our marine debris vessel, and it's basically a pontoon boat with a big catcher in the front of it. So if they drive over anything, it collects the debris. Also on the deck of it, you'll notice right here. We were the first in the US to get one of these. This is a marine debris drone. You'll see a picture of it in a second. So we deploy it with a crane. It's like a Roomba. So the one we have is manual. You control it. It's got a camera on it. They actually have autonomous ones. This is no lie. Like, because you can even be lazy in the marine debris world. But you could let it go in a marina and it would just go. And you just set it at the entrance and it'll kind of wander through and pick up the trash. So anyway, so every day, 4 days a week, this vessel goes around. There's some handwork. Okay, I gotta tell another story. So actually, this student, and we were in Sturgeon Bay, right in front of Stone Harbor along that break wall, and they were picking up trash. I'm like, oh, look at that, bait lids, bottles, this, that, and they had this whole basket on the end of this metal pole like that. And there was a whole family up there watching them, like, really neat. And it was actually that student last year. She's like, oh wait, I can get this, and that whole basket's full of trash. It's leaning and leaning. All of a sudden, that pole separates, and the end of it goes right down. And of course, the whole family's there like, I thought you're supposed to be picking up the trash, not picking it in the water. And her face was like as red as that life jacket. But anyway, so, you know, this is, I think, an important, you know, is this going to change the world? Absolutely not. But is it going to remove a bunch of debris from Sturgeon Bay? And the bigger part of this all gets characterized. So we look at what type of debris it is. And then we've got some installations at the marinas. And so where is it coming from? And that can inform public education and outreach. And so some of it's accidental, right? You're on your boat and something blows off or whatever. But there are some times when maybe we can take steps to not use that type of material. We want to put in, you know, water bottle filling stations at beaches and other public parks, because then people don't have to bring plastic water bottles, all sorts of things. Here's some things we found last year: a piece of a dock, boat debris, you know, bait canisters. That's them controlling it. Here's some things from out of the drone. I don't know how this glass Frappuccino bottle floated around, but whatever. And then anybody notice what that is? The cooler. Yeah, somebody in the marina was like, hey, you college kids, can you send my cooler over to my boat? So they threw a cooler on top of the drone and sent it across over. Let's call public relations, right? Sturgeon Bay, they got 308 pieces last year in our first year. So that wasn't too bad. It wasn't great. We also installed C-bins. So the ones at the bottom, that was at Egg Harbor last year. We just put one up at Sister Bay. And so they're essentially like a pool skimmer. So they sit in dead areas.
of the marinas and they just collect debris. And then somebody comes around also. They come around and they lift up the basket and then they dump it out. And again, there's a characterization based on size and kind that goes along with that. And this just gives you an example of 1 day of characterization. And this is in size from the lower right all the way around. And one interesting thing, does anybody know what plastic debris shows up in the fall in the county and you don't see it any other time?
Shotgun lot.
Yeah, the shotgun wadding, right? So it's like as soon as waterfall season hits, they're all, yeah, you can see one right there, all over the place. It's like I never thought of that either, but it makes total sense. Anyway, the B-Bot, now this is being used by or donated money to the Great Lakes. We have one of these that's being used in Manitowoc, but I'm arguing we're going to bring it up to Door County and use it. It's a mini beach groomer. And it goes through the beach and it actually sifts out debris. You can kind of see in the upper right-hand corner. This is a picture of things on the right. A couple Lake Michigan beaches, we get about 14 pieces of debris per minute. So just, you know, all little stuff, nothing big, but all of this material now will turn into microplastics. So literally a plastic water bottle, they say, oh, plastic lasts for 1,000 years. That's true. Plastic polymers do, but over time, like just 4 or 5 years between freeze thaws, curing, UV degradation, that will start breaking down into smaller pieces. And so you'll see that. So all of this fishing line recycling, we put in a number of those around the county. We got the county, a number of these trash containers with the small tops on it at different places to help collection devices. The Litatrap and this Collect Thor are two things I'm working on right now. We're trying to get some funding for these. The Litatraps actually go in, they just sit right in the storm drains. And so anything that goes in there actually gets intercepted. And so you just go pull them out. They work really well. They're using them in Ohio and Michigan. The Collect Thor is just a new technology that works a lot better than the C-bin. So we're hoping we'll be able to get some of those and install them in sort of high use areas, because why pick it up once it's out in the canal or in your bay? Why not, prevent it from even getting out the pipe to begin with? Because all of that plastic ends up as microplastic. So one of the other things that we're doing as part of all this is we're collecting water samples and sand and sediment samples and looking at the type and quantity and distribution of the microplastic. So we should have a good picture of what macroplastics are there and then what microplastics. And this was mentioned before, so I want to bring it up now. So like microcystin that was just talked about in terms of microcystis, that's a hepatotoxin. A lot of these blue-green algae or cyanobacteria form different types of toxins. Wisconsin's sort of famous. We have the first confirmed human death in the US from environmental exposure to cyanobacteria. There's 2 guys diving for golf balls in Madison. They had a few beverages and it was nighttime and all that kind of good stuff. And so microcystis is cyanobacterium and it's found in eutrophic or nutrient-rich waters. We've been sampling Door County for the last 2 years. Levels have been extremely low. We don't really see much, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't, right? So fertilizer runoff, partially treated sewage, phosphorus from sediments, all of those things can have an impact and trigger those blooms. And phosphorus buildup is not one of those things that always just kind of goes a little bit every year. There gets to be a critical number and all of a sudden it just takes off. And so it's kind of this almost exponential curve when it gets to sort of the limiting nutrient. But it also can liberate phosphorus as well. And nobody wants this, right? You can kind of see the bloom here in the lower left. This is in Winnebago County, Lake Winnebago, I call Lake Winneseptic. And this is actually out in front of our dock at our lab in Oshkosh, and nobody wants to get in there, right? I mean, imagine if that was out here, right? That it would just be horrific. And so nobody wants to see that. Nobody really understands why they produce toxins. It's been long debated. All blooms don't produce toxins. Some do, some don't. Some produce more or less. What the exact triggers are, nobody really understands. These are some other organisms, genera, that produce cyanobacterial toxins. We do the microcystin ELISA test, so it's an enzyme link test. It's very, very sensitive, relatively inexpensive. We're looking at trying to find some funding to get a microplate reader at the crossroads, so we can do it right here But right now, because the levels have been pretty low, we haven't seen the urgency for that. So these guys, again, while they're out, they're collecting microsystem samples. Those are frozen, and then they go back to the main lab for analysis. We are looking at phycocyanin meter. So this looks at a different pigment. So it's a pigment that's like we looked at indicator organisms before for bacteria, which are indicating the presence of pathogens. This looks at phycocyanin, which is a pigment that indicates that you might have cyanobacteria present. The state of Michigan doesn't use this because they can't get the data to work out very well. We think it's a sampling, like how you're sampling. And how the probe is oriented. So I've got a student this summer actually with part of the freshwater collaborative working on a project. So, where are we today in Door County? I would argue Door County has the most robust beach monitoring program, certainly in Wisconsin, if not in many places. And a lot of the data that gets presented nationally, what you guys have happen here and happen in Wisconsin is not normal. And so when we go places, they're like, oh yeah, they're like, hey, look at Liberty Grove, look at Egg Harbor, look at all the stuff they're doing. And people are like, oh my God, here they are again. But really, again, that's the sort of proactive nature of the county and people wanting to address this, right? So water's like integral to the culture and economics and just life here. We've started this groundwater monitoring program. Hopefully many of you have been involved in that. We're doing that 2 times a year. The county is just, I think, whether it's official or not, they've been working with a consultant. They're trying to get a consultant hired on to look at emerging contaminants. So everybody's looked at like PFAS and all these other things. And right now the answer is I don't know, right? Because nobody's really looked at it. So you don't know what you don't know. So they're, again, being proactive. There's no reason they have to do this, but they're going to look at a long laundry list of things that may be present. We've got our marine debris program, the cyanobacteria I mentioned. Microplastics, stream and local water monitoring. We often have groups that come to us and say, hey, we've got this going on. Would you mind doing it even at Crossroads? They're Big Creek. Big Creek's about as big as a table. But that was always funny when I bring students, yeah, we're gonna monitor Big Creek. And they look at it, really, where's the Little Creek? Anyway, but yeah, so all over, people need help. I think it's great. Like the students get to use and the staff, by the time they're done with their experience, I want them to get as much of variety of things as they can get. So they'll use multi-parameter sands, they'll collect, grab samples, composite samples, and so they'll learn a lot of environmental sampling. We are open to the public as a well water resource. We partner with the Bailey's Harbor wastewater treatment plant and Ephraim wastewater treatment plant to help them as the public access points. People can always walk into Crossroads if they want to. We do other sort of select research projects, whether it's Cladophora, the beach economics, Swords ID, we talked about that, beach restorations, and then, the emerging groundwater contaminants that we just mentioned. DATCAP just gave a presentation last year on some pesticides and things that they had used some of the monitoring program today. So where do we go forward? So I think the terms I use are vigilance and proactive, sort of understanding of what your sort of environmental parameters are, and surface and groundwater. Monitoring is boring, right? And if it's boring, it's good. And so, but that also means that you're not catching anything. Back in 2002, when all those people got sick in Nicolay, if we had the monitoring program today, over 3/4 of those people would not have gotten sick. There's been a couple other instances in the county where things have happened. And then there's an announcement, a beach notification goes up, things get taken care of, and the public is then protected. And so I just can't say enough. It's boring until you never need it until you need it. And so sometimes it's hard for people to realize that, but it is. I think community engagement and communication is extremely important. I love doing these. These talking has been pretty gentle so far. But we do this at Crossroads with the groundwater monitoring for all our research projects. We always have an outreach and public information dissemination thing. And winters are always good because downtime. And so in January or December, we'll try to maybe after the holidays, we'll try to do one where we'll summarize 2 years of marine debris and some of this other stuff. And then I think it's important to keep an eye on emerging issues. I think one of the other things that gets undervalued in this county is the lack of politicalization of water resources, right? And I think that's great because it isn't really a political issue, right? And so, in fact, listen to Brett McCoy of the Door County Community Foundation talk about this, and he's very eloquent when he talks about it, but he's done a very good job of navigating all the parties, right, that are involved, and making it a Door County issue, right? This is a Door County issue, it's not this or that. And so how can you keep that? And I think the economic sort of valuation of the environmental work is really an important way to demonstrate that to some audiences. Marine debris eutrophication. So we talk about phosphorus and other things in the environment. What trends do we see? That's always an important thing to keep an eye on because we're not removing phosphorus, right? So, the Fox River is one of the biggest phosphorus inputs to the Great Lakes, and it's just down the road. And so, how can we be vigilant about those things? And there's other things, if you go to the beach and you pull up some sand and you look at it, you really don't know, but you're probably looking at hundreds of plastic particles in there. And I love it. Anybody know what sea glass is? What is it? Yeah, what color is it usually? Okay, it could be brown, or what's the other color? Green. It's Heineken bottles, right? But some students are like, what? Come on. Like, yeah, like, no, okay. Anyway, and then partnerships, and this is just, I'm sure I'll apologize to begin with because I'm sure I left somebody's logo off of here. But I mean, this is pretty impressive, right? You've got academic institutions, you've got federal agencies, state agencies, you've got county departments, you've got all sorts of different people that have really come together to work on all these various projects, all related to water. This is just our partners in this county working on surface and groundwater issues just in the last number of years. But I think that's pretty impressive. I probably forgot somebody.
Yeah, I have a question. It basically goes back to the previous slides. Cyanobacteria. We do water testing at Southern Door. And right now, for the last couple of weeks, the algae are really bad. And my question is, because I feel a little bit uncomfortable even testing there, is there any visual indication that you can say you're dealing with cyanobacteria or not? I mean, I know you show the fancy equipment, but we don't have that.
Yeah, if you want a bottle, so if you first of all, if you want a bottle, we can give you a microcystin bottle, and you take it, and all you have to do is throw it in your freezer. You can bring it back, and we'll analyze it. It's not like an E. coli test, so we can't get it back to you right away. At some point, we might be able to do that, but we don't have that capability right now in the county. The one way you can tell it's more cyanobacteria. These are bacteria, and they're not. Algae are eukaryotic. They're larger, multicellular organisms. And so when you look at this soup is like really just pea green and almost liquefied.
Yeah, I mean, because it looks like downstream of the dam.
Yeah.
Would be just like your previous.
Like this one?
Just, to take samples there.
Yeah, I would definitely
uncomfortable.
Yeah, I would wear a glove for sure.
We do.
Yeah, and one of the things, well,
Visual aid, right?
one of the problems are cyanobacteria regulate their buoyancy. So they are able to regulate their buoyancy, and the reason for that is if you're too close to the surface, the sunlight kills you. If you're too low, you don't get enough light harvesting energy to do photosynthesis. So they regulate themselves up and down. So when you use a lot of those meters or you're collecting samples, you're sticking, if the water level's here, you're sticking that meter in here, right? And it's measuring way down here. Well, the cyanobacteria are right up here, and that's where a lot of the toxin might be hanging out. So I think a lot of it is how we're measuring it. So if you have a rubber glove or something else that you can use, we can give you a couple bottles. If we don't mind, we'll put them in with the rest of our analysis, and that'll help you know. The problem is the cyanobacteria, the confusing part is they can be there and not be producing toxin, or they can be there in very less abundant quantity than this and produce a lot of toxin. And that's where people really don't understand those triggers really well. It's not just nutrients, it's not just temperature, it's not really a defense mechanism that they're using. So there's a lot of debate right now about that, but it's something to be very concerned with. In the case of the two guys that didn't fare well in Madison, they were just diving under the water. Most of the time humans don't want to interact with this, and so they don't jump in. Dogs and things, health departments get called quite often where somebody throws their stick in, the dog doesn't think twice, goes in, it's really minute, just nanograms of this will be deadly. And so, you know, the dog takes 10 steps out on the lawn and yeah, it's pretty serious. The problem is once you get to this point, it's really hard to go back. So the whole goal, it's like the plastic debris, you don't want to clean things up at the end of the pipe and pick things up, you're better off upstream. So here, if you can prevent, whether it's, you know, stagnation, phosphorus accumulation, all of these other sorts of things that might launch that outbreak, that would be a much better way to prevent it. So with that, I'll say our group is number one in the number two business. I love septic haulers, you know, what is it, the Royal Flush here. My favorite one is, my wife was about to kill me. We're driving around by Wausau and it says, stay back 400 feet, this truck's filled with campaign promises or something. And I'm accelerating and like right behind me with my phone. I'm gonna die in the back of a food truck. And so anyway, with that, I'll say thank you and take any questions you guys might have. Yes, sir.
I had a friend that was walking on the beach, the lake, within the last 2 or 3 days, and there was like orange muck in the water, and they wouldn't let their dog go in. They were so concerned. Could that be something obvious?
Orange, not necessarily. Sometimes this time of year, depending on, you know, the runoff and things from the spring, it can be things from organic material that's been washed out. If anybody ever comes across that, like, you know, maybe there's foam in a river or something, and it can be caused by lots of things. Feel free to reach out to me or somebody else. I mean, I'm gonna volunteer these guys ahead of time. I mean, but they're already there, right? So it's sort of like this network, and they're going all over the place. And so if we can meet up, or if you ever grab something and want to bring it to Crossroads, even if nobody's there, feel free to bring it down, and we'll do the best we can. If I don't know, I'll try to ask somebody. But those are the perfect examples of, you know, we'd like to try to help to get to the bottom of it. The one we get a lot in the spring is the discoloration of things, and oftentimes that's related to organic material being washed in after rainfall and things sitting and degrading over the winter time. And then when water goes down, it'll, you know, kind of dry out and looks kind of nasty, but not necessarily a problem. But in that case, I'm not. Was that an Acorn or was that an Acorn beach or Ridges?
It was like gluten dry.
Oh, okay. Well, you guys were just down there today, so. So that's one of the environmental council. They're sponsoring some extra monitoring, and a couple of the sites are along those public access points.
So would a individual get a Ziploc bag of the stuff?
Sure, or like a canning jar, anything that's just clean. Canning jars work really well because they're glass and metal, so there's no plastic. But yeah, a Ziploc bag works, or, you know, but if it's liquid, then the canning jar works great.
What other towns are gonna change their beaches like Egg Harbor did?
Well, I don't know if there's any more that are gonna do it, but I know, okay, I'm gonna miss some, right? So Ancrum did it, Ridges did it, Murphy did it, Egg Harbor, Liberty Grove, Fish Creek had a plan, they did their own plan, Sister Bay, did largely their plan. Otumba had a plan. Sunset Park did a good job in Surgeon Bay with their plan. Trying to think if I'm missing anybody. Oh yeah, Ephraim did a little bit. Ephraim's kind of, there's not a lot you can do there because it's pretty small. Most of the beaches on the bay side that were high traffic, you know, from Liberty Grove down to Murphy, all did the re-engineering on the lake. Oh, Jacksonport. So Jacksonport did a really good job at Lakeside Park. And then Ancrum and Ridges and Bailey's Harbor did it. There was nothing else north of there on the lakeside. There were a couple plans for Southern Door down by like Sand Bay. But I'm not sure if those were ever done or not.
Did you provide any recommendations to the city of Sturgeon Bay with regard to Otumba Park?
Not last year. Yeah, so, you know, this is the cost benefit, right? So there were plans for relocating some of those storm water discharges, you know, kind of, it used to be the old adage, right? Solution to pollution is dilution. There is something to that, right? So instead of discharging right next to the beach, you'll notice there's one other beach in the county that was high on the closure list up there that has a stormwater pipe on it. Anybody know what that is? Yeah, Fish Creek, right? So it's the only other one. All the other ones have moved those discharges. So they have had some recommendations. Soil and Water has worked with them on that. I don't know, you know, why things have been done or not been done, but I suspect it's cost. That's pretty significant infrastructure to move or extend out. And then once Otumba is unique because it has a bulkhead line that's been established out. So there's all sorts of permitting requirements, but it's out in the bay for some sort of, you know, historical reason. So there are some options the city would have that other municipalities wouldn't have. But I don't know, those are discussions that I really was never part of. It would be great to see one of those disappear. You know, I mean, you think about it, we monitor 24 inches, but where are the most vulnerable populations of people swimming? At 12 inches, right? Sitting right there. I always love the kids that sit at the beach and they never have to go to the bathroom. They have to go to the bathroom, but they never go to the bathroom. So anyway, but they're also very vulnerable, and even older people, right? So like, you know, maybe you don't go all the way in, it's not full body contact, but you know, people don't realize it's like eating a sandwich, right? You go there and you're touching the sand or it's shallow, and so you almost feel like you should be sampling at 12 inches or whatever. But if you did that, that number of closures would be through the roof. Some states like Michigan sample out here. If I want all the beaches open all summer long, I just tell these guys to walk out as far as you can and collect your sample, the beach would never close. Literally, I mean, we've published papers on this, the farther out you go, the less the E. coli is by a long shot. The farther in you go, the higher it is. So that's probably the single biggest factor in influencing the monitoring numbers.
I'm already seeing a lot of Cladophora in Green Bay, which I feel like it's early, floating around in there pretty thick. Is it?
I don't know how much is there. I mean, lake levels have went back down again. You know, so Cladophora, those people that were around back in 2008, and then one was at the early 80s. You know, when the water levels were really low. I don't know if anybody was around then. But every time the water levels go down, Cladophora requires a hard substrate to attach to for growth. And so as the water level goes down, and actually zebra mussels and quagga mussels, because the water clarity is so good, the light penetrates and they're able to, you know, that particular type of algae is easier to grow. Increased temperature, right? The lakes didn't freeze over this year. What's the biggest loss of water in the Great Lakes? Yeah, and so when you don't have, I mean, it sounds counterintuitive, right? So if you have a warm winter, then you know you're losing a ton because you're not having that ice cover. So we lost quite a bit. I mean, just a couple of years ago, there was water over the road in Sturgeon Bay, right? You know, and that was like 3 years before that. People swore the water was never going to go back up. And so I think that's the kind of world we're into at this point. But certainly, as temperatures increase, water clarity increases, which is a good thing. You know, as that water level fluctuates, you're going to see those come and go. If there's more out there now, I don't know. I do know at some of the marinas, just because we've been there for the marine debris. I mean, there's already a significant amount of algal growth in some of them, which is kind of disheartening. But yeah.
What is the source of the Cladophora?
I mean, they're just, I don't know the reproductive structure of Cladophora, but it's ubiquitous in the environment. And when it finds a place for attachment with light penetration, it'll just start growing. So, I mean, there's nothing that triggers it. You know, I mean, phosphorus in freshwater environments is often a limiting nutrient for it. And certainly the more phosphorus, the more growth you get. But I don't think phosphorus is at a low enough level that it's limiting the growth of phosphorus. It's really light penetration and water level in most places.
Maybe I missed it, but you generated some financial indication as to what people would be willing to pay to improve water quality? Was that used somehow in beach reconstruction, or was that just
Yeah,
data?
yeah, so the partner that I work with is a business professor at Whitewater. Yeah, I mean, he'd probably be ashamed that I condensed his 40 slides into 3. But yeah, so that was all done after the reconstruction. So when we approached the re-engineering of those beaches from the water quality perspective, right? What was the source of E. coli? How can we mitigate that, and how can we improve water quality? When Egg Harbor took the dive, they were the first, and then it was blatantly obvious when that was done. You looked at it, like, I mean, I was bringing my kids there, right? And other people brought their kids there, and then it was just, again, it was just like, wow, look at all these people. And then that's when the idea to let's look at what's going on. Because when you talk to people about the benefits of what you're doing, some people buy into the water quality argument, right? But other people you might have to convince using other data, right? And so the economic data then is maybe a different population of people that have different interests. And so you say, okay, listen, yeah, I'm doing the, ecologically right thing here, but look at the economic benefit, because, every village or town has to make economic decisions. I mean, there's financial limitations everywhere. And so what do I want to invest in? What don't I want to invest in? But at least hopefully, and we're willing to share the data. I can pass it on to anybody. I'll pass my partner's name on. But hopefully when they make those decisions, they have all their data, right? So they're not just making it, I'm investing this to clean water at the beach or dump sand in at the beach. I'm investing in our community. I'm going to make a better beach, but this is what the better beach is going to do for the rest of the community, right? Whether it's the restaurant owner, the shop owner, whoever in town.
How concerned are you about phosphorus in the Bay of Green Bay, especially related to capos and the growth of capos, the number of animals, and the amount of manure, liquefied manure that seems to find its way up into the bay?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at agricultural operations, there is no doubt. So in my other life, on my campus, I was responsible for getting our digester, our dry anaerobic digester commissioned. And through that process, it became one of our partners at one of our projects with Rosendale Dairy. And when you've got that many animals in a very small area, there isn't a phosphorus excess just in general. The problem you've got is you've got high densities of phosphorus in very small areas, and then you need to find ways to distribute that to get it to be used more effectively, right? So right now you've got so long. Maybe I should be a politician, so I'm not really answering the question. But that's not so the phosphorus that goes into whether it's Green Bay or any sort of water body, almost any is too much. And we're just at that point, right? And you can go from northern Wisconsin to southern Wisconsin, and you can watch the lakes, just the quality deteriorate, and they become much more eutrophic. Now, some of that is natural, right? It's just natural aging of things, but a lot of that is accelerated by thousands of years by whether it's agriculture. A lot of it, everybody wants a perfect lawn, right? So people are fertilizing their lawns, and now we don't have phosphorus in our fertilizer officially, and and all these other sorts of things. So the more you can limit phosphorus, the better, because whether it's algal blooms or whatever, once it's in there, it's extremely difficult to get out. I mean, there's all sorts of debates on how the best way to do that is, but it's extremely costly. It's just So long story short is I think phosphorus management is hugely important. There's phosphorus trading that goes on. So places that have high densities of phosphorus being produced, they can trade phosphorus credits for somebody else. And it wasn't intended for agriculture. That was really intended for wastewater treatment plants, because that's another one, right? So in Door County, we're kind of unique here because we've got several municipal wastewater plants, but only 2 public drinking water systems, right? So Sister Bay and Sturgeon Bay for drinking water, but Ephraim and Fish Creek and all of them, Bailey's Harbor, all have wastewater plants. So they have to meet phosphorus discharge requirements. And so it isn't always ag that's looking to make sure that, and then we've got, some communities in Wisconsin don't allow holding tanks. You can debate that, right? So in Door County, that's permitted. In my opinion, that's a good thing, right? I'd rather have somebody collecting it and having it go to be treated in a controlled way. A lot of places don't do that, and so what does that do? That forces people to, you know, do creative things with old stuff. And so anyway, so yeah, so I mean, globally, the phosphorus issue is a problem in the Great Lakes. It's a problem in southern Green Bay, and it's only gonna get worse. And so it's just being proactive, I think. You know, we've talked about that before. I think, you know, just having a good handle. Phosphorus is one of those things where, whether it's sediment or whatever, you should be able to watch change over time. Because it doesn't happen, you know, it's not like that. And so hopefully, again, collecting quality data in a very sort of systematic way, you're able to look at that and be able to make decisions on what's happening.
My fear is that the phosphorus in the southern bay coming down the Fox River, because of the counterclockwise basic flow of the bay, that what's coming down the river is eventually coming here. I'd like to be wrong about that.
It might be. I mean, I don't have any data to tell you like how much of that is moving in the circulation and all that kind of stuff. See, look at her even leaving. She's got to get to the lab really.
Yeah, this is closely related. One of the problems I have, and we're following this now for many years already, and that's not surface water, that's drinking wells in Kewaunee County.
Yeah.
And what's happening there, they testing there now almost for 2 decades.
Yeah.
And what I don't see is the feedback loop from the people who can do something about the problem. I mean, the problem is well documented with colleagues, you know, from UW Medicine, scientists from USDA, Maureen Muldoon, who said, what was it? A karst,
the worst place to put a bunch of cows in the Northeast.
in karst, because that didn't come up here. Door County is a karst environment, so anything basically that ends up in the surface water very quickly goes down in the groundwater. So what bothers me, after about 2 decades of testing in Kewaunee County, they still have a problem that about 1 out of 3 tested wells are not suited for drinking water. And you might have heard about it. They had to build a new subdivision there, which is doesn't have mound system or septic system. It's a sewer system. So you know, this gets political, and that's, I think, one of the major problems why these people after 20 years still have the problem what they had about 20 years ago. And that really bothers me, because it's well documented what the problem is, but the powers to be, it's all about the money.
We just went through COVID, so you don't have to tell me about politics and not making sense. But yeah, I don't know. One of the joys of being a scientist and not a politician is I collect data, I give it to people that make decisions. I understand. I mean, there are places, I mean, I think it's interesting that people come to Door County and just, you know, Kewaunee County is unique, but you come to Door County and you see what you see, right? But like, we didn't talk about the groundwater and the karst geologic formations here. I mean, this is a very sensitive area, right? And so people that just visit have no idea that's going on. And, you know, one of the things, again, whether it's the vigilance and testing, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that said, well, I tested my well a couple years ago, it's fine. And I mean, really, like, you should be every month, you should, I mean, listen, you bring in your sample every month. I don't want to tell them that because it seems like I'm just trying to sell them well tests. But it is, I mean, things change here on a scale that's not seen anywhere in Wisconsin. And there are people that understand that. So for example, transient non-community well systems in the state of Wisconsin, their bacteria are tested once a year, except here, they're tested quarterly. So people recognize that higher variability in areas that, or in positions that can do something. But you know, why people get permits and all those things, that's certainly above my pay grade.
Well, we really like to thank you for your work for the 20 years and the great crew.
When I say, yeah, usually it's old people that go to bed early. Like, that's me, like, this is like my bedtime. Yeah, that's probably exposing it. Maybe that's what they're going for the last call. But yeah, no, it's been great, and when I say 20 years, it's a long time, but when you look back and you do start to get some sort of institutional history about things and you know, watching, you know, but what I hope is history doesn't repeat itself. And when you talk to people that have been around a long time, the water quality, whether it's groundwater or surface water today, I believe is much better than it used to be. You know, 40, 50 years ago. Now, is it great? Can it be better? Absolutely. But I think that we have made a lot of improvements. I think there's, you know, whether it's wastewater treatment, whether it's septic permitting, whether, you know, whatever. Now, are there exceptions to that? Of course. And, you know, in Door County, for example, one of the things that doesn't make a lot of sense to me is why there's not more municipal drinking water. They already have infrastructure for sanitary sewer in many places. You know, I know where my property is in Billy's Harbor, the sanitary sewer ends like where the where the fireplace is. So it's like why they didn't just, you know, it's just, again, where do you start and stop and you know, but as far like here, given the geology, the more public drinking water and the more public sewer you have, I think it's better for everybody. You know,
Yeah, and I think rather, and I know a little bit about the new groundwater monitoring that they approved, I think last week in Door County. It's I mean, they're looking for I think 120 individual wells.
Yeah.
But like you say, if you have a public water system and you can consider that Sturgeon Bay has several wells, but then you have one source.
Right.
So if you know how to treat it, then you have one source. If you have 120 wells, which a fraction of the people, then that makes it a lot more.
Well, and individuals can't afford to have treatment devices in every house.
That as well.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we could be here like all night.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Let's give a big hand. Nice one.